Hello and welcome to more history stuff. So recently I made a series of videos about the life and career of Gruffudd ap Gwenwynwyn, Lord of Southern Powys and Wales in the 13th century. And I haven't updated that series for a while, so I thought I'd move on to the next and most crucial and controversial part of his career. So at the end of the last video, I'd taken him up to 1269 when he witnesses his lord, Prince Llywelyn ap Gruffudd, Prince of Wales, suffer his first real political and military defeat in Glamorgan in southeast Wales at the hands of Gilbert de Clare, the Earl of Gloucester. Llywelyn came into Glamorgan with the intention of conquering a large chunk of it, but in the end he's forced to turn around and march all the way back to Gwynedd, having achieved nothing at all. And this probably marks the first real crack in the alliance between Llywelyn and Gruffudd, which has been going since 1263 and has been quite successful considering the history of antagonism between their rival dynasties and between them as individuals. But by the late 1260s, things are starting to sour a bit, and Gruffudd has forged what would turn out to be a very important alliance with Llywelyn's brother Dafydd, this very dissatisfied and controversial figure in Welsh history. Dafydd's lifelong ambition is to be Prince of Wales in his brother's stead. That seems to be his driving goal. And he fights several wars against Llywelyn, loses all of them, but is repeatedly forgiven and taken back into the fold. Llywelyn is quite a sort of merciful character in this respect. But he might have been better advised to just do away with Dafydd and hang him from the nearest tree, because Dafydd would cause him a lot of problems. And then Gruffudd, as I said, the alliance between Powys and Gwynedd is starting to fracture by the end of the decade, and it only gets worse. Now I'm going to be reading from my notes as usual, so if I'm looking down, that's what I'm doing. And if there's any pauses and hesitations, that's because I'm frantically reading up on this this very complicated subject, because what happens next is complicated, and it's quite difficult to piece together the exact course of events. So we go up to the spring of 1273, 4 years later, 4 years after Llywelyn suffers his defeat in Glamorgan. Now by this point the shadows are really closing in around Prince Llywelyn. He's at war with several of the Marcher lords. He's being attacked on all sides, and at this point, strangely enough, the one person who he really needs to come back and help him is Edward. Because before Edward left for the Holy Land in 1269, the relationship between him and Llywelyn was actually quite good. They were actually allies. They were getting on pretty well, and there was quite a lot of compromise and agreement on both sides. And Edward is now the King of England, because his father, Henry III, had died the previous year, November 1272. So he is really the only figure with the power and the influence to try and save Llywelyn, or so the Welsh prince hopes, from all these enemies he's got clustering around him. And it turns out that Llywelyn cannot trust the man who he till this point has regarded as one of his strongest allies, and that's Gruffudd. And how much blame lies on both sides is difficult to figure out, really. Certainly Llywelyn isn't all that sensitive to Gruffudd's territorial ambitions and the borders of their lands. For instance, in the spring of 1273, Llywelyn starts to build a new castle on the borders of Gruffudd's territory of southern Powys. This is at Dolforwyn, above the River Severn, in an area called Cedwain. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Cedewyn, Cedwain. And this castle is within only half a dozen miles of Gruffudd's own stronghold at Poole, or Welsh Poole. And this is quite an insensitive move on Llywelyn's part, really, because he does two things by building this castle with regard to his relationship with Gruffudd. He's implying that Gruffudd is not strong enough to defend this part of the borderlands, this part of the marches, by himself. So Llywelyn needs to build a castle and install his own garrison there to buttress the defences of this part of Wales, which is quite an insult. And he's also threatening Gruffudd's hold on the region and his revenues and his political influence, because Gruffudd has not only got a castle at Welshpool, but he's got a market, he's got a town, and for Llywelyn to build a new castle and a new market, because he also founds a market at Dolforwyn, really he's setting up a rival business venture against Gruffudd, and their relationship is fragile enough already. And this might well be the final straw as far as Gruffudd is concerned. He thinks that Llywelyn is now taking advantage of their relationship to try and encroach on Gruffudd's territory and to try and take land, power, influence and money. Of course, money is always important. You've got to always remember where the money is. To take all these things away from Gruffudd and to try and assert his dominance. And Gruffudd isn't having that. So what happens next is this very dramatic event in which there is actually an assassination attempt. Now, I've got to try and get the dates and the details right, because this is complicated, and the reason it's complicated is because there are several different accounts of exactly what happens, and none of them really agree with each other because they're all coming from biased sources, which is, you know, typical with history, especially medieval and ancient history. You can't trust the sources. What you've got to do is compare them to each other and then see what seems to be the most likely version of events. So, the most widely accepted account of events is that in the start of the year 1274, Gruffudd and his ally Prince David, they basically hatch a plot to kill Llywelyn. They're going to do away with him. They've decided that this guy's got to go. From David's perspective, he has wanted Llywelyn dead for many years, so he can replace him as Prince of Wales. And Gruffudd hates the House of Gwynedd anyway, hates Llywelyn and his entire family. And he's had enough of this alliance, he's had enough of being pushed around by Llywelyn, watching him build castles on the border of his land, intimidate him, try and take his money, his influence, and he's decided to get his response in first, that he's going to get Llywelyn before Llywelyn can get him. So this is the generally accepted version of events. The third conspirator is Owain. Owain is Gruffudd's eldest son. He has several sons, but Owain is the eldest and will eventually succeed him as Lord of Southern Powys. So these three are in on the plot to murder Llywelyn. So what do they... Let me get a little bit more light in here. What do these three characters decide to do? Well, the plan was for Owain, Gruffudd's eldest son, accompanied by a group of men-at-arms, assassins, to travel in February 1274 to Llywelyn's court, to where he was resting. David would be with his brother. He would make sure that he was in Llywelyn's company. And at this time of year, January, February, this is quite an important date in the calendar of the Welsh princes, because the prince's guard, his taili, his personal bodyguard, they're called the taili, this is the time of year where they go on a customary circuit of the prince's lands to check up on tenants, to take money, taxes, that sort of thing. And this is called the cilch, the customary cilch or circuit. What it means is that the prince himself at this sort of vital time of year, just after Christmas, is undefended. He has no bodyguard. He doesn't accompany the bodyguard on this circuit. He stays in his court, and all he's got around him is his servants. And this seems quite a strange custom, really, because you'd think that no king or prince in his right mind would ever strip himself of his bodyguard and leave himself so exposed and vulnerable. But this is apparently what they did. And so Dafydd and Gruffudd and Owain very cleverly choose this time of year to try and get at Llywelyn, to try and kill him when he hasn't got anyone around to defend him. And the plan is that on a pre-arranged night, Dafydd would creep outdoors, secretly open the gate of the court buildings, admit Owain and his men, and then guide them to Llywelyn's bedchamber. There they would kill Llywelyn, they'd do away with him, Macbeth style, stab him to death in his bed. And then the following morning, Dafydd would be proclaimed a new Prince of Wales. Owain would receive the land of Gwenwynwyn. That's quite significant because that's the area in which Llywelyn was building his new castle of Dolforwyn. The price of Owain's involvement in this conspiracy is that he wants that land, and presumably he'll take the castle as well. And he also wants the land of Kerry, the adjoining land of Kerry, which his father Gruffudd had laid claim to some years before. Owain also agrees to marry one of Dafydd's daughters, and so this would seal a new alliance between the houses of Gwynedd and Powys, but on very different terms. Dafydd would now have a much more equal relationship with the princes of Powys than his brother Llywelyn had, because Llywelyn had always been careful to be the overlord. He was the dominant partner in this alliance with Powys. But given that Dafydd has conspired, or would have conspired, to kill Llywelyn, and he would have owed everything to the support of the lords of southern Powys, particularly Gruffudd and his eldest son, then that relationship would be much more equal, and the lords of Powys would be that much more powerful. They would be on an equal footing with the house of Gwynedd. And in the long run, I should imagine that the real brains behind this entire plot is Gruffudd. This is what he's been planning for decades. He knows that Dafydd is a weaker character than his brother. Llywelyn is a quite remarkably forceful and intelligent personality. He's a very skilled politician and soldier, and it's very difficult to remove him, to get the better of him. But if they can knock him out, if the lords of Powys can kill Llywelyn, knock him out of the game, and then replace him with Dafydd, who's a much less able figure, probably much less intelligent, much less perceptive. For instance, he doesn't seem to be able to figure out that he's being played by Gruffudd and Owain, that he's been used as a tool to destroy his own dynasty, because after all, Dafydd is also a member of the royal lineage of Gwynedd. Then that would be happy days for the lords of Powys, and the next step, of course, would be to destroy Dafydd, kill him, possibly with the help of the King of England. Shouldn't be too difficult to get him to help. Kill Dafydd, and perhaps take over the whole of Wales, and you'd have a Prince of Powys as Prince of Wales. But in the event, the best laid plans don't work out, because Owain, who's meant to actually kill Llywelyn, he's actually delayed on his way to the court by a snowstorm. The weather gets in the way, it foils the entire plan, and he's forced to turn back. And then in the following weeks, Llywelyn somehow learns about the plot. A little bird tells him what's been afoot, what's been planned, and he comes to his castle of Dolforwyn in Gwenwynwyn, and he summons Gruffudd in front of him to explain himself. What's this all about? Gruffudd acknowledges that he had offended against the prince, and he fell to his knees and begged for forgiveness. Interestingly, he's not actually charged with anything specific by Llywelyn. There's a slight question mark over Gruffudd's involvement. Did he really want to help Owain and Dafydd to kill Llywelyn, or did he plan something slightly less drastic, but those two decided that no, we've got to get rid of Llywelyn, we've got to just get rid of him, kill him, cut his throat, dump his body in a ditch, and that'll remove our problem. So Gruffudd goes down, literally physically goes down on his knees before Llywelyn, begs forgiveness. And as a punishment, Llywelyn takes more of his land in Powys. He doesn't do anything else to him, which is strange. He doesn't imprison him, he doesn't execute him, he doesn't put him on trial for treason or murder or anything like that. He just takes some of his land, which again, either Llywelyn was in a remarkably merciful mood, or there was some ambiguity, some question mark over Gruffudd's precise involvement. There's no doubt whatsoever about the involvement of Dafydd and Gruffudd's son Owain. Owain is taken hostage by Llywelyn, and he admits everything a few months later. In November, he coughs up the entire plot. He tells the Bishop of St. Asaph all about it, gives all the details, basically admits, yes, I'm guilty, this is what we were planning to do, please don't kill me. And Dafydd just legs it. He makes a run for it. There's a state of war for a few weeks or a couple of months at most in Gwynedd, where it seems that the soldiers, the war bands of Llywelyn and Dafydd are fighting each other. How long this goes on for, it's all very confused. The accounts get very fragmentary and puzzling at this point. But at some point Dafydd realises that he can't win, that his only hope is just to get out of Wales, flee into England and beg for shelter at the English court. And that's what he does. He takes some of his men, his soldiers, and he flees. And he's joined not long afterwards by Gruffudd. Gruffudd also decides that there's no point sticking around, and he flees across the border, and both of them take shelter at the English court. So the assassination plot has failed. Gruffudd and Dafydd and Owain have not succeeded in their plans. Llywelyn is still alive, but things are getting very murky, very edgy indeed in Wales, in North Wales. And you get this impression of sort of shadows, darkness closing around Llywelyn, that he might have foiled this plot, but he's got some very powerful enemies now. And they're all still alive. They've all got away, and they're not going to stop. And it's difficult to see what he could have done to save himself. Certainly by this point, if he had killed Dafydd and Gruffudd when he had them in his grasp, perhaps a more ruthless man, more sort of hard-edged man would have just cut their heads off. That might have solved his problem, but he didn't. He let them live, he let them go, and that would prove a mistake. So, I think I've rambled on for long enough. I hope this was interesting. We're up to 1274 now, and King Edward, the new king, Longshanks, is on his way back from the Holy Land, and things are about to get very, very nasty indeed, especially if your name is Llywelyn. Okay, so I'll talk to you again, hopefully. See you later.